I bought a book simply called Paddle Tennis. And what I discovered was that a very wealthy family in Philadelphia, somewhere around 1896, they wanted to build a tennis court on their property, but they wanted some modified, smaller version for their children. That's how paddle tennis began. Now, somewhere in the 1930s, 4 men from the New York Yacht Club were sailing up in Nova Scotia, and they saw a paddle tennis court, but where the owners had surrounded it with chicken wire. And these men and women, they could play it off the wires. That was its very beginning.
That was from the movie The Longest Game, and nothing like that actually happened. With only 2 books providing the history, and long since out of print, it is no wonder that there have been misconceptions. To chronicle the game's history, and to celebrate those that contributed to its growth, was the raison d'etre behind creating a museum and Hall of Fame. And now is the time before memories faded, and ranks of those who witnessed the early days dwindled.
Well, my father was a New Englander, and his next-door neighbor was one as well, and they were good sportsmen. And we're trying to think of something to do in the wintertime that would be fun, outdoors.
My father was an engineer at Yale. He graduated in 3 years, and he loved to create things. And so he designed this court.
Through the perseverance and vision of APTA President John Harai, the Platform Tennis Museum and Hall of Fame Foundation was incorporated in 2000 and achieved tax-exempt status in 2004. A traditional brick-and-mortar facility was the goal, but it became clear that a multimedia approach would be required. The physical location of the museum posed a challenge, and a fixed locale would limit accessibility. Thus was born the book Passing Shots, a pictorial history of platform tennis, and the Virtual Museum, that tells the story of the game, houses historical material in a searchable database, and includes a Hall of Fame with detailed biographies, and can be accessed from anywhere. So how did the game really start? Well, serendipity, and at the insistence of a wife. Blanchard, a Hingham, Massachusetts native and Harvard graduate, made his way to New York City to embark on a career in the textile business, and settled in Scarsdale. Cogswell, from Portsmouth, Maine, earned an engineering degree from Yale and set his heart on a career working in the Canadian mining field. And that's what he did, but not until he had married his hometown sweetheart, who made it clear that she was not going to follow. So he reinvented himself as a salesman, moved to a place Francesca would like, and discovered Blanchard was his next-door neighbor. Looking for entertainment during winter, they hit on the idea of building a platform on which to play various games. They tried some, but it was only when Cogswell stumbled across the equipment used in playground paddle tennis that they developed the game we know today. The size of the court area was set by the size of that first platform, which had been restricted in dimensions by a large rock. These court dimensions have stood the test of time. Plymouth Rock is justly famous, but our paddle rock is a close second. Right from the start, one serve was used and has never been seriously challenged. And despite what you may have read, playing the ball off the screens that had been put up by necessity to make retrieving balls easier was also part of the game from its very early days.
The platform tennis court is 1/4 the size of a tennis court, 30 by 60 feet overall, with lines being 44 feet by 20 feet in width. The net's 34 inches in the center as against 37 inches for a tennis court. Now, surrounding the entire playing surface is a 12-foot high superstructure to which is attached 1-inch hexagonal steel fencing, chicken wire in effect, off of which you can play the ball.
And what about the game's camaraderie? Well, that was Francesca again. The game that Fess and Jimmy had developed was an instant hit with their neighbors and friends, and weekend gatherings featured organized play, plenty of friendly banter, and afterwards tea was served by Francesca. This group called themselves the Old Army Athletes, and they celebrated their activities with songs and poems. On the bulletin board by the first court, a note was posted on March 30th, 1930. Helped by paddle tennis, says Scarsdale banker, member of Exclusive Set, I suffered from excessive shyness and protruding ears, but now that I play regularly with the boys, I have been successful in society as well as in business, and the ladies flock about to watch me flex my muscles. Frederick Allen, the editor of Harper's Magazine, was the suspect. When Fox Meadow built the first club court in 1931, the Old Army Athletes that weren't already members joined en masse and became the core of the club's paddle program and imbued it with their spirit and camaraderie. That's how it started, and it remains that way today. Incidentally, the game saved Fox Meadow from possible bankruptcy. The club had now become a busy place 12 months a year. And what happened next? Well, for one, Don Evans solved the game's biggest problem, consistent wires, and with that the game's future was secured. For another, Fess was acting as the game's Pied Piper, promoting it any way he could. And Jimmy made it easy for new courts to be built by providing detailed construction drawings for free. Their efforts bore fruit. During the 30s and early 40s, the game slowly expanded and attracted many fine tennis players, including the likes of Sidney Wood, who, along with Frank Shields, actress Brooke Shields' grandfather, was in the Wimbledon men's singles final in 1931. The game was set back considerably by the war years, but soon thereafter it started to expand again in both the greater New York metropolitan area and elsewhere. National championship draws started to grow, and the crowds came to watch. By 1959, the Nationals had the largest entries since inception, 51 teams in mixed, 43 in women's, and 77 in men's. That year, Jim Gordon, the man that made the forerunner of the laser work in practice, and in doing so helped win the Nobel Prize for his advisor at Columbia, won with Bill Cooper.
You're about to see the Platform Tennis Championships from Scarsdale, New York. Platform tennis is a sport that requires split-second timing and coordination. Let's see how the game is played.
The Junior Boys was inaugurated, and the forerunner of the Hall of Fame, the APTA Honor Award, was created. Fox Meadow, the home of platform tennis, continued to be the center of the paddle universe for the better part of the first 70 years of the game. Spectators flocked to the club to enjoy the competition, and much history was witnessed on Court 1, the game's equivalent of Wimbledon's center court. By the 1970s, the game started to really grow and began to attract media attention, money, more players, and larger audiences. The first commercial platform tennis center opened. The APTA rose to the challenge. New bylaws were written to reflect current conditions, and the APTA was incorporated as a non-profit. Even an executive director was hired, and this was the first time we heard, "Thank you, Bob Brown." The next time was over 20 years later, when he spearheaded the no-let-on-serve rule and subsequently gets thanked each time one of those is a winner. The professional era had now begun, and the men's national became sell-out events. Draws had to be restricted, and at Fox Meadow entry fees charged to keep crowds manageable. Dick Squires dreamt up new promotional activities such as the first APTA-sanctioned professional tournament, the VAT Gold Cup, down in Hilton Head, and the Pro Keds tournament in New York City.
And of course there is the defeated group of Steele and Jennings, the 1975 champions.
In slow motion, match point. Point that won $10,000. In comes Chum Steele behind a forehand. Very bold to come to the net behind the ball. That's such a crucial point. He's hit through, and they lose the match.
Well, our champions are crowned. That is the biggest payday ever in the sport of paddle, as it's referred to by the aficionados.
Tribuno started a tour, or rather two, and they treated women the same as men when it came to prize money. The money was considerable, a $40,000 commitment in the days when a college graduate might have made less than half that in a year.
One of the nation's fastest-growing competitive sports is platform tennis.
Coke, Dr. Pepper, Passport Scotch, Hertz, and Mercedes-Benz were all involved. Heady times. World-class tennis players got in on the action on the men's side, guys who had won Olympic gold or had been the first amateur to beat a professional at Wimbledon. The mid-1970s saw the formation of the American Professional Platform Tennis Teaching Association, as well as the International Platform Tennis Association. The game was on a roll. To bring excitement to the women's game, one that had been dominated by club players, a paddle tennis champion from California who had easily beaten Bobby Riggs for a $1 bet, and her partner were imported to raise the level of women's play.
Well, I think it's a great equalizer among the sexes. The game knows no leaps or bounds. It just will keep going, and that's the sport I'm into.
This was also the beginning of paddle innovation, something that had not happened in 3 decades. This caught the APTA flat-footed and forced them to rewrite their equipment specification and conform to the paddles being used. And that's how we got the maximum of 87 holes. One innovation in the early 80s coincided with one of the great championship runs in the history of the game. Yes, Rich did have an advantage. He owned the patent. Arguably, Rich's invention was the beginning of the high-tech paddles we use today that rely on advanced aerospace composites for their construction. But not all was fine with the game. The professional era had created a lot of issues for the APTA, and some players were beginning to claim that the game had moved too far from its roots. The expansive dreams of sponsors began to fade, and funding for tournaments and publications began to dry up. The 1980s was a difficult time for the APTA, as they had struggled to get the game back to its amateur roots. Finances were becoming precarious. Enter Chuck Fessel, who was APTA president starting in 1988, poured his heart and soul into the association and helped right the ship. On his retirement from the APTA board, APTA president Charlie Stevens said, "Chuck led us from a period of corporate insolvency to the threshold of breaking the $100,000 equity position." By the mid-1990s, the APTA was again on a roll and saw our favorite Viking, along with Rob Fulton and Patty Hogan, revitalizing the APTA junior program, the future of the game.
I like paddle tennis. It's just really fun. It's because it's smaller than tennis. It's really fun game. You can play it in the rain.
And look where we are today. The President's Cup and Nationals have now grown into major extravaganzas. Chicago has become the largest paddle community through the efforts of a number of Hall of Famers. Those 5 national championships held in 1935 have now grown to 29 and encompass all ages of juniors and seniors, even a men's 145 plus, which draws enthusiasts well into their 80s. The game is strong and spreading. Who would have thought that a national tournament would be held in Florida, even if it took 40 years after the first platform tennis tournament for cash was held there? And the level of play for both men and women is unbelievable and exciting to watch. What emerged over the history of the game? Foot faults and issues with the ball. Thank you, Fess, and thank you, Jimmy. You gave us a game we loved to play. And thank you too, Francesca, or rather Tech. Camaraderie you helped instill is very much alive. Oh, and you and the old Army athletes should also know that quite a few of us have developed much higher self-esteem. Fess died in 1963 at a Harvard-Princeton football game in the excitement of a Harvard touchdown. And Jimmy died one morning in 1959 tending to his lobster pots in Kittery, Maine, where he had retired to build boats.